Wait for it. Can you hear us? Can you see us? I don't know. Where did we go? We're here. Wait for it. Oh, I don't know. Where's the tech guy?
I'm here, but I have no clue actually on this one. It looks like we're at black screen.
I know this hasn't happened before. I'm gonna try. Okay, here we are. I'm gonna try and remove that.
There we go.
And
We
then
fixed
go
it.
back to this.
There you go.
Amazing. Good job.
I feel like every time we do this show, something different happens with that countdown video. It keeps us on our toes. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another gathering of the Fractional Forum. A very cool opportunity for some smart people to have conversations about complex business problems that honestly need more than one smart person in the room to solve. And we're super excited to spend some time on I don't know why I pretend that we're going to talk about anything except complex business problems on the show, because we have another mission for today, which is by no means any less complex than the other episodes that we have done so far. If you are joining us for the first time on the Fractional Forum, welcome. As you might have noticed during the intro, I called this a gathering and not a show, because this is not six heads here performing for you today. This is an opportunity for us to gather together to be in conversation about complex business problems. And if you were here and you were joining us live, then you were part of that conversation. So we encourage you to get into the comments. We had some great comments last week that really added a huge amount of value to the conversation. And so I really encourage, if you are here with us, let us know that you're here, and add your thoughts, because as you also might see, we are multidisciplinary. I can't talk today. It's fine. It's going to be fine. Multidisciplinary conversation. So you and your expertise are also welcome in the conversation. We really would enjoy to have your voice as part of the gathering today. With that, are you ready, panel, for the problem of the week?
Yes, let's hear it. We're ready.
Okay, so also for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, the problem of the week isn't a one-sentence problem. We have asked, we actually have a forum on the website, thefractionalforum.com, where people can submit business problems. And there's an opportunity for you to be as loquacious as you would like to be. And I particularly would like to thank our submitter for today, because what they have done so beautifully is, I think they're trying to help us. They're trying to help us put their problem into our categories, which is very sweet of them. We may or may not break down those silos, but I'm going to present it as they have put in here. So stick with us while we go through this problem. So our submitter is the CEO of a construction company that does both residential and commercial projects. They have 120 employees, and their high-level business challenge that they are sharing is in managing project timelines and budgets in the face of chronic skilled labor shortages and supply chain disruptions. I think any of us who've done any work in supply chain have experienced that lately. We're experiencing delays in completing projects, leading to cost overruns, missed deadlines, and strained client relationships. Here's where they lovely broke it down into what they believe the categories to be. So from an operations perspective, project schedules are frequently disrupted, forcing constant adjustments. From the financial perspective, increased costs from expedited shipping, subcontractor premiums, and penalties for late project completion. From a sales and marketing perspective, the reputation is taking a hit due to missed deadlines and compromised project quality. From an HR perspective, difficulty hiring and retaining skilled tradespeople, contributing to ongoing project delays. From an IT perspective, lack of integrated project management software to streamline scheduling, procurement, and communication. And also, a most important framing that we love to always include on the show is the personal well-being factor, that says the continuous stress of juggling multiple delayed projects has caused significant work-life balance challenges. They have taken some previous steps they have mentioned. Something that worked is that they partnered with local trade schools to create an apprenticeship program, which helped grow the talent pool. What didn't work, we attempted to centralize procurement. Nope, my tongue just isn't cooperating today. You guys know what I mean. Procurement. That's through a single supplier, but it worsened supply chain delays when it didn't meet demand. Oh, and Tim is sideways. Tim is going back and forth with us today. That doesn't mean he's not going to provide everything we need to know from the sales perspective. And lastly, some additional context. Our company has built its reputation on high quality craftsmanship and timely project completion. We are hesitant to lower hiring standards or compromise on materials. How can the Fractional Forum help us streamline operations, stabilize our workforce, and strengthen supply chain management to meet growing client demands? Bum, bum, bum.
Well, I think one thing that's clear is this needs a different perspective, and that's why I keep shifting my camera to bring a different perspective to the problem.
The production quality keeps going up. This is all planned.
That wasn't just a camera trick. That was all
right.
Intentional, folks.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so Tim, do you want to start
because,
off by
I was just going to say too, it's because obviously they're doing really, really well. There's a lot of demand. So Tim can, play around with different perspectives because certainly it starts with that.
Well, and that's one of the things I kind of just want to ask a little bit about that success, right? Because it's between the lines, you can kind of read there's some growth things in here and some reputation that they built. And I just wonder if they've taken on projects outside of that original work that they did, and if that's complicated some of the things that they're talking about. They need a different set of specialized skills. They need a different set of materials through the procurement and the supply chain. And so I want to start with something, Lindsay, you talked a lot about is clarity and focus on that different perspective shift again. I don't know. Let's just go with it. The clarity on what types of projects and what types of clients that they're working on is really, really important. So maybe you got some thoughts there, Lindsay, to start.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you actually really uncovered something that I didn't even think of. So this is the power of this perspective. And it makes me think about, Tracy, a conversation you and I had not long ago about businesses that say, we want to scale, we want to double, we want to triple, we want to be a $5 million business. And then they just do, right? There isn't a lot of how do we get there? And then what are going to be the barriers along the way? So I think, Tim, you said it super well by saying, did you start to create a product or a service that's outside of your scope on labor that is pushing you into that resource constrained category after doing this really great job at creating this partnership through the trade school. And then the other thing as well is now your processes that are in place, are they really, really adding a layer of complexity to that? So Tracy, you and I chatted about this, and you said you worked at a company that was like, oh my gosh, let's be a $10 million company. And then there was no, even from a marketing and sales perspective, how do we get there? So the value in value mapping this all the way through is massive. You can't think of everything, but there's huge advantages when you decide that you want to grow. I mean, very little companies it just happens by accident. There is intention behind it. But have you thought of all the different possible outcomes or obstacles that would come of this expansion?
Well, and I think on that note too, because as you mentioned, Lindsay, we can't predict the future. We don't have a crystal ball. But we can look to create something, but there's a very foundational piece of the puzzle that has to exist there, which is you have to know why you want to create that. And so the example I was actually sharing with Lindsay was even more drastic than that. It was going from $3 million to $15 million in 1 year. And I was like, that sounds awesome. How will we? We're going to just do the same things that we've always been doing to be a $3 million company. It's not, no, we're going to be a $3 million company, which is not bad. It's not bad to be a $3 million company, right? Lots of people would love to be a $3 million company. But the thing that's interesting, and I find this happens like so often, and when I'm working with CEOs, one of the things that I force them to get clear with me on is, why did you choose that number? I want to double sales for next year. Okay, why? Because it sounds good? Because if it sounds good, then it's not going to, that's not enough. That's not enough to pull what you need into the doing part of the business to make that happen. But now let's say you have a goal of expanding from we're all in Alberta, expanding from Alberta into, oh, Islam is joining us. He's in Cairo, Egypt. So let's imagine that you are going from Alberta to Cairo, right? Like, probably pretty different markets. But if you have a good reason, maybe you've decided you want to spend your retirement in Egypt. It sounds much warmer than Alberta, Canada. Then you actually have, whether or not someone else wants to look at you and be like, that's not a good reason. Like, doesn't matter. You have a reason, and that reason is very clear to you. So now I know why I want to expand to that location. And in order for me to expand to that location, I need to make this amount of money, because I need that amount of money to fund what I'm going to do in building the business in this new location. Okay, now we have something that we can start working back from. But I would love to hear, Carolyn, your perspective on this, because you're really the money lady. Is that, like, how tied in does that number, that target number, need to be in order to make the, I mean, like, a lot of the things mentioned in this business case are tactical things. What level of clarity and meaning needs to exist at that level in order to make those tactical things work?
Absolutely. I think the micro level really matters here, right? And one, I think actually the company's doing a good job by being aware of some of their cost overruns. So I think you had mentioned there are things like, higher shipping costs. There are things like having to pay contractor premiums to their subcontractors, and then some different late project completion penalties. So one, I think it's good that they're at least aware of where their cost overruns are happening. One of the things that I sometimes find that companies end up doing is they don't necessarily have a full handle on the universe of their cost, right? So if you were to think of your cost as being an entire pie chart, if you were to think of yourself individually, it's kind of like the company that, or it's kind of like the individual that's spending 80% of their income living in Vancouver on a really expensive condo, and they're really worried about the latte that they're buying. Like, okay, that's great. But I think what they might need to do is a little bit of prioritization to figure out on any given cost, like what's their pie chart of the cost, and then start prioritizing it. So is it that they're, do they want to go after shipping costs first? Do they want to go after penalties first? Do they want to go after the different subcontractor costs first? All of them are important, but all of them are going to take time, effort, and different tactics. What you don't want to do is be the company that's kind of like, not throwing away, but essentially throwing away all kinds of money on higher labor cost, and then redirecting all of that effort to try to save $20 a month on a software subscription. For sure, like, I think there's a little bit of prioritization that they need to be doing on their different jobs. So one, good that they're looking at it, good that they're aware of it, but I think a certain amount of prioritization is needed. When you get the micro well and you start getting jobs consistently profitable time and time and time again, then it becomes that much more easier to have a rinse and repeat cycle to kind of say, hey, now we want to go into Cairo. What would that ultimately end up looking like? But yeah, I think there's kind of like, when I think about it, and I bet there's probably a lot of perspectives that others can jump in on, but it seems like they kind of need to prioritize what they're going to tackle first. I see it on the finance micro side of like, which of these is really driving up the biggest dollars. If it's something like late project project fees, and that you're operating in a supply chain constrained environment, then go upstream to your sales processes. Go upstream to actually kind of say, why are we building that into our agreements in the first place, right? We know that there's all of these risks that are likely to happen. Is our default contract, like, are we being commercially smart when we're entering into it? That becomes an easy lever to be able to change. You address that one, go on to the next one into the list. What do you guys think? Where else do you see some areas where they could really prioritize a little bit further?
Well, I think I'd like to build on that as well a little bit, Carolyn, even with what Tim said at the beginning around what they're saying yes to from a sales and revenue perspective as well. Because I think that you talked about prioritization from the cost side of things, but I think from even starting further upstream than that, what are they saying yes to? What are the projects that they're taking on? I feel like growth can be incredibly addictive sometimes. And all of a sudden you start to get this confidence by, winning this project. And then you kind of drift 2 degrees to the right, and then you win this project and you drift again. And all of a sudden you're selling things that have no resemblance or are very far away from the core competency you originally had. And I think that probably a combination of growth from kind of a top line revenue perspective, but also growth from a perspective of these are brand new projects or initiatives that we've never taken on before. And I'm making a couple assumptions here, but I've seen it many times where that sprawl in terms of what that offering becomes in the pursuit of growth can be really dangerous. And that's where sometimes I just think that, like, I think to Tracy's point, arbitrary top line revenue goals are kind of dangerous. Especially if it's just, can be a great motivator, but it also doesn't have a lot of purpose behind it.
Yeah, I'm going to just add to that. And one word that really stuck out for me in this scenario was craftsmanship. And that takes time. That's focus on quality. So that should be the number one priority for them. And so they've lost sight of that already. We're hearing there's issues with quality control. And so it doesn't surprise me that there are hiring and retention issues, because that core why, they've diverged from it. And so there isn't sort of that anchor point to bring everyone together to focus on craftsmanship and quality. And perhaps they need to actually reframe their timelines on these projects. Maybe it's not realistic anymore.
One thing I'd like to say too is when we talk about craftsmanship, it's so easy to think, especially because this is a construction company, it's easy for us to think craftsmanship when we talk about custom cabinetry or like millwork. But craftsmanship should be a value that's fully integrated into the entire company. And when I think about the intention, when you want to grow or you do grow and scale, like being very thoughtful about everything. So I'm just actually going through this with a client of mine. We have very large growth plans for next year. And what I did as the ops person is took all of that money and broke it down into labor. And so this is what it's going to look and feel like as a company. This is 6 more employees. With 6 more employees might come another leader. Do we have a leader in-house that can start to do that, right? So craftsmanship isn't just like an actual like building furniture or, putting that last screw in a deck. It can be very much like should run through the vein of the entire company. So, if I think about 120 people in a company, there's likely individuals like us in that company. There's likely operations strength as far as leadership and sales and marketing and HR. The opportunity for to take that like big goal or even like what they're sitting in right now and break it down. So I'm expecting that they kind of have already done that because they have taken the time to break things down, and at risk of getting like too far in the weeds right away, as I could do about like resource planning, capacity, and all that kind of stuff. It's something to think about. Like if they actually action that value of craftsmanship, what does that look and feel like to every single person of the company?
Yeah, and I think like that was where I was going to go with this too, because it kind of drives me back to like, let's just say we have a top line revenue number that we've set, right? But also our value is craftsmanship. So how someone would achieve that revenue number who doesn't care about craftsmanship is different than how someone would achieve that number if you do care about craftsmanship. So I think this is a really interesting opportunity because a lot of the quote unquote challenges are related to things that are not connected to the craftsmanship. And if they're not delivering on the craftsmanship, then what are they delivering on? What's the point of them quote unquote delivering? And so there's another thing that comes up for me in this, and maybe it's just because they've like so lovingly broken this down into the categories, is that a lot of these things are not like category dependent, right?
Mhm.
So a project schedule being disrupted in operations has a financial relationship with subcontractor premiums, which has a tie to the reputation in sales and marketing. And then it opens up this conversation about the quality or the craftsmanship, shall we say, of the communication between the different pieces of the organization. Because once you get to the size of 120 employees, inevitably you are now going to have silos of people working on specific business problems. That increases the importance of the communication between not just two departments, but all departments. So, Tim, what are your thoughts on this communication component? Because I mean, sales is generally setting the expectation a lot of times.
Well, it is, and sales, you're focused on growth, right? And that's first and foremost. Is you're always looking for more. You're looking for more wins. You're looking to do more. And I think growth is an important personal attribute, but also in a company, it's a very important attribute. If you're not growing, you're falling behind. But growth can mean so many different things. And I know that this business problem didn't really define top line growth as a goal. We kind of talked to it a little bit, but I'm just going to make an assumption it's in there. Maybe growth just needs to be defined differently for the short term because they're having some financial penalties, they're having some challenges with employees. Maybe growth is bottom line focused.
Mhm.
And so we're looking for the kind of projects that help our bottom line, and we're doing the things to help our bottom line so that we're not taking these financial pennies. We're getting things done on time. We're getting the right materials in. And so the short-term focus is still on growth, but it's just looking at how do we get those efficiencies in the bottom line. So that would be making sure you communicate across the entire chain. What kind of projects can we take on? What capacity do we have? What capability do we have? Where are some bottlenecks? So that sales is going after the right kinds of projects to help everybody win. And if you don't have that communication all the way up and down the chain, they might just be chasing the shiny nickel that they see rather than having a clear ICP, ideal client profile, and going after the right kinds of projects. So communication really needs to be set up so that you have that clear visibility. What are our capabilities and our capacity right now in what areas?
And that feels like another opportunity for craftsmanship to lead the way, right? Barry,
Yes.
it's making me think of like if this is a communication thing, then it's a people thing, right? And so, what does it look like to craft meaningful communication in the organization? So, did you want to speak a little more to that?
Yeah, so I think again, I mean, I talk about purpose a lot and the why, but their reason for success has been the quality of product that they've offered. So they need to go back to where they came from, to where their success came from, and build accordingly. So foundationally, that's bottom line, that's important. And then everyone that you bring onto your team has to have that in their value system. So it's not just about rushing through a project. That's why, I had mentioned maybe the timelines aren't appropriate anymore. Maybe they need to look at their whole system very differently. If they are an organization that builds custom homes, then it's not really about timeline. Their customers are coming to them focused on this quality, beautiful product that they're creating. And if they have to wait 2 years for that, then they can wait 2 years for that. And that's the trade-off, right? When you're looking at, from a marketing perspective, what is it that you're selling? Is it based on price? Is it based on quality? What's that focus? And it streams into people as well. And so the people focus is really about quality and the people that want to do a good job. And all of your incentives on the retention side have to tie into that as well.
So let's talk
And
about
go
sorry.
ahead.
Let's talk about I know I will pass this one to you, Keith, because it will tie into technology. But if we talk about people, what are we doing as a, executive group at making the people, helping them achieve success, reaching their full potential. We've talked a little bit about mission, vision, and tying back to craftsmanship. The other thing I think about is organizational design. And, I often talk about the RACI matrix: who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed on all of these initiatives. One thing that came up was timely project completion. So certainty, right? So if you want certainty, everything has to be super, super clear, because clarity is like, we talked about this before the show started. We were having our own discussion about clarity, and clarity in a moment, it goes away the next moment because the conditions are constantly changing, right? So having these things in place, and then having like KPIs and stuff to support like indicators of things that aren't going well, which this would all support that like bottom line, preventing operational leakage, potential turnover, churn rate, things that that do affect bottom line, but then inadvertently will affect your top line. And then yes, like that's clarity. Commitment. Is everyone committed to the overall like objective of the company? If they all came for craftsmanship and certainty, and now we've pulled out the rug from underneath them, like, are they lacking confidence? Are they feeling lost? Is there like a tool or software or something we can put in place? The event center in Calgary that just finished, they resource plan completely through Excel. Like, this doesn't have to be like highly complicated. There just has to be an intention to do so, and commitment to kind of continue with it. The other thing is collaboration. We talked about communication. Like, how are we working together? 120 people. There is a lot of working together. However, when we get in a state of stress and we're not doing well, what do? We kind of like go in and we stop thinking we think a little bit more me. So that's very important. And like, even when we look back to craftsmanship, the other thing that pops in is, for me, is consistency. Like the what, the when, the who, all that, is part of it. As far as like when I think about operations, but key, like technology, they scream for it, they ask for it. I mean, I throw out Excel. We all know I love to solve every problem in Excel, but I also love all technology. Certainly, we all agree there's definitely a time and a place for it. So throw it over to you and your thoughts on that.
For sure. Well, I always feel like I'm a little bit of the technology contrarian sometimes, where I think the best way to solve technology problems is actually with the business first. Then you can use the technology to add scale, add intentionality. I think that's one of the words you used. And I think this scenario is no different, right? I think that if you layer on technology to a broken process or a broken communication or broken fundamentals, you're just actually going to amplify some of those elements that are broken rather than actually solve anything. And you're just going to be able to make it so that people can confuse each other faster, so that they can rely on a process that is actually not really there. And it actually creates this false sense of security that doesn't exist. So I think my recommendation for this organization would be to really get in place some of those fundamentals first. Understand, how do you want to communicate? Sorry, I was distracted by Tim's
Keith
very
switching
elaborate camera.
perspective. So Tim is
I like
doing
it.
his thing.
I
always like to be the center of attention.
I can't wait until we do the dramatic zoom in at the perfect time. That'll be great for like a future clip or something. But I think that if we focus on some of those fundamentals in communication, map out what that process and how we want to work is, then all of a sudden this organization can start to say, okay, well then how do we want to add scale to this, right? I agree, a project management platform is probably critical for an organization of this size. I don't, at 120 employees and probably the revenue they're generating, trying to do something like that in Excel would be possible, but ambitious. If you look at some of the challenges they're having around procurement and the tracking of all of those different assets and inventory parts and things that are going into these builds, the ability to use technology to have line of sight around where all of these elements are is really important. And I think that, back to Vered's point around even that culture of craftsmanship, I think technology can also be a connector on that front for the organization that they want to be. And what I mean by that is that they can kind of set the tone with technology. And if this is an organization that's not focused on pumping out as much as as fast as possible, but rather meticulously crafting these experiences and these buildings. And you know, I'm not sure exactly what they build specifically, but if craftsmanship is the goal, then all of a sudden you can start to echo some of those same principles and those same philosophies through how you use and roll out technology across the board too, to create that culture and connect and amplify those things that you really want to amplify. And so, you know, that might go back to even those KPIs that you talked about, Lindsay, and saying, okay, we can then tie all of these things that we've now got the foundation in place. We've now got tools to amplify the correct behaviors at scale. And now we can measure those back to our KPIs. And I don't know, Carolyn, if you want to head anything you want to connect on the KPIs.
No,
Carolyn, before you jump there, I just want to respect what Scott has shared because he's predicting where you're going to go with that.
Okay.
So we'll see if he's accurate. Carolyn is expectedly thinking that the timeline for a project example, building a home, is part of budgeting resources.
Yes.
I'm going to pull this down just so I can read the whole comment.
Okay.
But there's more. Delays in job change orders get to where Lindsay was making the case for maintaining integrity of the time management, labor allocations, and quality of the outputs. Alignment between responsible internal departments and external participants and across fractional stakeholder contributors must anticipate the capacity among team members. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you, Scott. We got to get you on this show.
Yeah, I know. Scott has all the thoughts.
Yeah, he does. He does.
We'll talk. We'll get you on the show.
Okay, before I dive into that, I wanted to go back to Lindsay, what you were mentioning about certainty. I heard a research study that was so kind of funny, that like how humans totally drive for certainty. So they asked a pool of people. They said, do you want to have 100% certainty that you're going to get an electrical shock, or a 50% certainty that you might get an electrical shock? And more people actually chose the like, just tell me I'm getting it. I want the 100% certainty than the like, you might not even get the shock. So humans are crazy. I think, Scott, you're totally right, because understanding the timelines is really kind of where that's going to drive a lot of your human resources costs, right? Like all of your labor costs is going to be significantly impacted. So you're going to have a lot more uncertainty throughout the entire organization, not just on your specific job in the custom home that you're building, but as and when those resources are shifting, your costs are changing, right? Your costs are changing, or the people are kind of rolling on and rolling off. So it definitely integrates back in with operations. And then on the procurement side too, is that you end up having this case that you're trying to figure out a centralized, presumably a centralized procurement team, right? You're not going to have a procurement person on each and every single custom home. So you have this interplay of having some of your staff and some of your organization that are essentially centralized resources. Think of it as your procurement people. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of construction companies are going to have an individual project manager, you know, working kind of as the project manager, account manager for this custom home, for this home, for this home. Well, how do you set up incentives and KPIs that are aligned? Because that individual project manager, they care about their budget, they care about their timeline. But for this company to really drive bottom line profitability, there needs to be a certain amount of coordination, both on the project by project KPIs, but company wide. So how do we make sure that those individual project managers are also thinking about how are they using the centralized pool of like the centralized pool of HR, the centralized pool of procurement, all those different centralized pools, I think have to be balanced. You don't want someone to be just so focused on their own blinders of, I want this for my specific project, that they're inadvertently doing things that are harming the company's overall plans. And the reality is, when you're working in an environment that has supply chain shortages, that has labor shortages, you've got to get really, really creative in how you're helping individual projects help each other. And so you really need to make sure that whatever KPIs you're doing or setting in place are going to encourage that type of coordination, because that's how you're going to be able to win in the market there. But yeah, I think a lot of it though comes down to like kind of setting those different expectations for the project managers, setting those different expectations for those centralized resources, kind of getting everyone's expectations fairly aligned. But I think a lot of it also comes down to, if you're trying to build a new home in Egypt and build a new home in Calgary, you might not always be picking the right projects. So I think in a lot of ways it touches back to what Tim was mentioning at the beginning of like getting really, really clear on what projects to kind of pick through. What are your thoughts, Tim?
Well, and that's exactly what I was thinking there, is those expectations are so important, so that you're highly tuned to what you can be successful at. And as humans, and we're searching for opportunities, sometimes we want to be open to everything. But yet, if you're highly tuned to your ICP, like I was talking before, your ideal client profile, it jumps out of you like that red car that you just bought. You see red cars everywhere because you're highly tuned to red cars. So that ICP is your red car, and those opportunities will jump out at you, and you quickly ignore the ones where the customer's expectations just are in the wrong perspective. Just like my camera. I apologize. I don't know what the
The
hell.
timing of that was awesome.
Yeah. I don't know. I wish I could do it on purpose, but I have no idea what's going on. So it'll be somebody else's turn to have camera problems next week because Tracy had problems.
It was my
last
turn last week.
I kind of want to jump into the last line that Scott mentioned. Must anticipate the capacity among team members. I think that's something that like both Barrett and I can speak to. Capacity and capabilities is really, really important. So we've talked about like having the intention of doing that, you know, before you scale, but here's a great opportunity. We need to build capacity. Often we think about bringing capacity in, but doing a really good internal audit as far as like what your capacity requirements are. So I spoke of like, if you want to be, what does a $4 million or $5 million or $10 million company actually look and feel like as far as capacity? Part of that is machinery, people, leaders, software, all of that. What does that look like? Mapping it all out. But then, you know, doing it like really breaking it down even further than that, because as Scott mentioned, like alignment between responsible internal departments, external participants across fractional stakeholder contributors. So it speaks to what Carolyn was saying as well. Like, let's all break it down and like get together and like speak through it, right? We do quarterly meeting, annual meetings. We talk about this all the time, these goals, but do we spend the time of like breaking it down, get a whiteboard, markers, and actually like map it all out? Because it is all an intertwined system. So capacity, we think outside, bring in labor, we got to add capacity, but it's not always that. You can add a lot of capacity by, you know, cultivating alignment, like removing waste and loop backs. Do you have feedback loops built into what you're doing? Do you track, like I said, KPIs? Do you have scorecards where you're tracking things like loop backs? If certainty and timeline is important, if you have a schedule or you have resource planned, what are some leading indicators or like early things that are telling you that, you know, you're off track with things? Have you built buffer time into it? I could go down a path, you know, like put on my PMP brain and get into the whole principles of project management. But I mean, really, I know like partnerships between HR and like operational leaders is really, really important, because having that like breakdown. Barrett, you speak all the time about HR strategy, and this is just like new to my world. It's been blown in the last like, you know, 6-8 months that I've known Barrett and her company, and actually like realizing there is a very smart way to do this in advance, so that when you're going, like, labor shortages is across like North America, but Calgary construction, it's massive. So I don't know, Barrett, like it's probably a great opportunity to kind of tap into like HR and what that looks like as far as capacity, capabilities, strategy.
And it ties very nicely into what Tracy does as well, which is really around figuring out, you know, who's your target market, because really that matches very nicely to your employee population. So your employer brand, you know, matches very well to your external brand. So maybe Tracy, I'll let you speak first, but then we can get into how to create that common language across the board, which is really fundamental to being able to scale appropriately.
Yeah, and I just actually, I would love to hear your comments, Barrett, on the capacity piece, but I also wanted to just kind of throw it back to Scott in the chat, who's added some more framing in terms of capacity as a matter of definition, average versus peak or base capacity. No enterprise nor person can maintain peak capacity for very long, but it's always wavering. So some excess capacity in the average is natural. And I think it's these types... things. It's funny because I feel like this concept of certainty has come up on like most of the episodes we talked about so far. And I'm totally in alignment with the research study that you quoted, Carolyn. Like we observe that humans participate this way in the world. But then it's also really interesting for me. It's like the question I wrote down as a takeaway for myself: is there certainty in adaptive management? Because Lindsay, one of the phrases you often use is we're like building the plane and flying it at the same time. Right? And by nature, there's not certainty in that process. And so in driving for certainty, is that helpful, or is it more of a, like one of my favorite books I've read is called Mastering Uncertainty by Matt Watkinson. Highly recommend if people haven't read it. But the whole concept is not about driving for certainty. It's about mastering uncertainty, and that there are areas where certainty can exist and there's areas where certainty cannot exist. And therefore, how do we create the ways of being around the things that will never be certain, and create like a level of comfort with the fact that there are certain things about this that will never be certain. And I mean, I live in marketing. Marketing is never certain. Right? Like by nature, it is a piece of the puzzle that is always evolving and changing, because the humans that we're talking to are always evolving and changing. Even from the employer brand perspective that you mentioned, Baird, like this is how employees are attracted to the brand is always changing. Right? So it is inherently adaptive. But when we know that humans who are looking for certainty, and especially in like an employment scenario, right? Like people love to be able to know they're going to be able to have a project to work on when they come to work in a day. There's this ongoing balance between what certainty can we create and what certainty can we not create, and how are we creating clarity of that in the process when we're talking about things like capacity, which, as Scott mentioned, are complex. This is like one very tiny piece of the puzzle, right? And it's very complex. And then that is a complex piece of the puzzle that is connected to many other pieces of the puzzle that also happen to be complex. And so I'm not trying to create this like never ending, we'll never be able to solve things, but also it's an interesting, I feel like I've gone off on a tangent, but it's an interesting conversation of like what needs to be solved. What's the problem, right? Which of these things is a problem that can be solved because we know how to solve it, right? We might have some insight on how to, I mean, like Baird, for example, you have insight on how we could drive activities and clarity back to this is our core value. If our core value is craftsmanship, there are things we can do to do this. But if our core value has actually evolved, okay, well, we can't necessarily use all of those practices then. We have to go back and live in the adaptive management zone of we don't know what we don't know, and we have to figure it out as a team. So I don't know. I just threw a whole bunch of stuff out there, Baird. I don't know where you want to go with that. But
absolutely. I'm actually going to just state another book for people to be aware of and to think about, which is David Roth's Your Brain at Work. Talks a lot about psychology and how our brains are at work. And it talks about things like safety, certainty, but it talks about autonomy as well. So we have to bring it back to the people to problem solve every single time, because they're in the trenches. They know what's happening. They see the problems, and we need to give them the space to solve those problems, to open the lines of communication. So it's one thing to have certainty and to be anchored into the value of craftsmanship, but then what? What is happening amongst the project managers? Are they communicating with one another? Is there a common thread in the situations that they're encountering? How do they problem solve together? We can't just work from the upper echelon of the CEO to problem solve. We have to bring it back to the people who are doing the work. And people are resourceful. Bottom line, they're resourceful. They know the answers. We just need to create those communication lines and the pathway for them to problem solve and to find out the solution, and give them enough of the rope to be able to create those solutions internally as well.
Totally agree.
So one thing that you threw out, Tracy, and I was at a PMI conference and they were speaking about adaptive capacity. So yes, 100%. We like certainty as humans, but having that adaptive capacity, and the more adaptive capacity you can have, like Vered spoke of, having that adaptive capacity and autonomy right down to your front line is really, really important. And having that, back built and reinforced into your business of how you work, because clarity in this moment and as the conditions change, it's not going to be clear. So we also have to have ways of working that support adaptability. So while there might be, a certain level or percentage of certainty or understanding, ability to pivot and be agile and adaptive. This is taking me. I'll always bring it back to sports. But my dad used to say this. I've had other soccer coaches. It's called playing on your toes. You got to be ready all the time. You have to have composure. You have to be prepared when to act and when to stay. But definitely like thinking in an adaptive way and having capacity to do that, buffer, lead time, whatever you call it, leading indicator. There's so many ways to create a system that gives you the ability to be adaptive. Part of it's mindset, right? I mean, I was listening to Carolyn's thing and 100% of getting electric shock, like it seems insane to me, but yeah, kind of, because then you're prepared for it. It's the fear or the unknowingness of it that terrifies us. But anyways, there's my 2 cents on that. The adaptive capacity.
And I think you're absolutely right. And Scott's comments earlier on capacity are so critical. There's things in this business, I'm sure, that are not as restrictive as others. So having certainty on these are the ones that don't matter so much is I have a Rolodex. I'm going old school. Rolodex of plumbers that I can call on. I got a bunch of plumbers in my phone. I guess that'd be the more modern way to say it.
I was gonna say, I feel like the problem might be the Rolodex.
Yeah. I have a lot of people in my phone that I can call on if I have capacity issues in plumbing. But in some other areas where I have very specialized things that I do from a craftsmanship perspective, where they talk about some supply chain issues, there are certain things I have to be very cognizant of in setting expectations and planning. And that capacity is never the same. It's constantly changing. And Scott's added some more about the constant change. That communication we talked about earlier is so important. Is where do we have capacity? Solving some of the communication challenges they have around project management. You can just set those expectations. And there's things that we can look out and we can go, okay, we got some capacity out here for this type of thing. Let's try and fill that capacity there if we have some of that planning and communications sorted out. And there goes my camera again. So there's that different perspective that I brought to the picture.
But
yeah.
I'd like to build on that as well, because I think that in terms of the capacity, we've talked a lot about their internal capacity and that flexibility. But in terms of some of the supply chain and procurement challenges they're having, we also haven't really talked about the capacity of the ecosystem of partners that surrounds them. So if we imagine a scenario that this organization is growing incredibly rapidly, and let's say they buy screws and nails from one company, and they usually buy X amount every year, and if their own pace is outgrowing that of their supply chain and their suppliers, or they're not managing that actual supply chain and some of that ecosystem of all of these really critical partnerships that orbit them, then there's this whole other piece of management that also is a real kind of pain point for them, which is how do I actually get all the stuff I need to build the things I need to build? And that growth around the ecosystem, I think, is one thing we haven't actually touched on. We've talked a lot about internally, what does it mean to be at the organization? How do you add clarity? And I think all of those things will have to translate out to their supply chain as well. But I think, even from an operations standpoint, Lindsay, like what's your thoughts on kind of managing some of that supply chain, managing some of that risk, and kind of managing some of those partnerships as they continue to grow and scale as an organization as well?
I mean, I see this as an opportunity, right? Because it's a great opportunity to go to your supply chain and start renegotiating partnerships on, like, quantity, and not just quantity, but consistency of orders. So, like, really shoring up those partnerships that you have externally, building out like your procurement Rolodex, Tim, of that, which is really, really great. I think one thing that this individual mentioned was that they went all in on one supplier, and you get something, you're comfortable with it, and likely, I'm guessing they delivered. So now it's a great opportunity. Every problem is telling you something. So it's a great opportunity to get out there and see what else is out there. You don't even have to get out there, like throw it online, like, put it out there that, you're looking for supply chain. We often post on our website that we're hiring, but, looking for different individuals that can come in and present options for that. External resources is really, really important. Internally, like, to bridge the gap, you definitely need resources in-house that are gonna collaborate internally and externally with that supply chain and stay on top of it. And again, just like, Scott said, the only thing that is certain is that things will continue to change. Is the only certainty is the uncertainty, in a way. But really, like, being able to have a lot of options to pull triggers to, when things start to go south or someone can't deliver. If there's what happened last year or the year before, there was that big freighter and, the Suez Canal, like, who would have predicted that? Again, thinking on your toes, you have to be really, really prepared. But how do you do that? With a Rolodex, right? Like, you definitely have to have like a Rolodex, like a spreadsheet of all your trusted resources, build those partnerships. Ideally, you do it when you say we're going to go like 5 times the size or whatever, but it's a great opportunity. But just know that you're coming out as a person who is reaching out to supply chain in a place of abundance and opportunity. So it's a great position to be in, to go out there and negotiate those partnerships.
And I think one thing you mentioned as well, Dennis, to quickly add in around that consolidation to a single provider. We're seeing this a lot in the technology space right now, where things are evolving and changing so quickly that organizations sometimes feel like there's this value in consolidation because it seems to make it simpler. But with some of the specialization, with some of the changes that are happening, sometimes that also introduces an incredible amount of risk and generalization as well. And I wonder if that's happened here too. Like, it looks like it's created some of those supply chain delays around that one provider not being able to meet demand. But I also wonder if they've also started to take on some of these things that are outside of their scope, just adding these, if their suppliers are having those same say yes to everything challenges. I think that could be interesting. But I also recognize that we're starting to come up on time here a little bit. So
yeah, and I want to, well, first of all, there's a couple of things. We've mentioned Scott's additional add-on about how change is constant, and I just wanted to share that because he went to lots of efforts to write these amazing things. So adding to that, adaptive and flexible approaches are required. Availability, volume, quality of inputs and outputs are regularly changing. Consequently, effective communications and agility in pretty much all the departments enable more fluidity in the development of solutions. He listed a whole bunch of them, but I interpreted that as pretty much all of the departments. We also had a very specific comment earlier from Islam related to the procurement piece of the puzzle. So for our friendly CEO who submitted, they can outsource their procurement capabilities, but at the same time, they won't have control over the process. So that's the pros and cons. If they choose well, they can utilize the power of outsourcing their core operations like procurement to a specialized company to help them perfect the processes and to help them to use quality management stuff. Sorry, I butchered that. But the point is that there are opportunities to outsource, but like again, coming back to that overarching why might we be doing those things? So let's do a quick round of wrap up from our panelists today, starting clockwise from Baird. So Baird, what are some like final thoughts you'd like to share?
I love that they had already thought of the apprenticeship program. I think that's great. They have a unique value proposition, bring people in early, teach them the ways of building beautiful craftsmanship homes. And the other thing is really thinking about your why and your purpose and being sure that you're anchored in that, because building out all those systems of recruitment, onboarding, need to speak the same language to do things properly and have the right language across the board and clarity to be able to scale with more ease.
Awesome. Lindsay.
I would say the team should get into a boardroom, draw a massive fishbone on the whiteboard and break it up into different departments in the organization and break down like these problems. Like we took our best crack at it, had some experiential shares, different things to try, but ultimately likely you have a lot of answers within that room that you can work to collaborate and align on it. So, all you do, like Google it if you don't know the fishbone diagram, but it's a great problem solving tool. Typically what you think is the solution isn't always. It'll surface, it'll symptom, check or temporarily fix. I would deep dive into like all the different pillars of your business and figure out, but do it in a collective way with the entire team, because that also establishes and reinforces ownership and commitment with the team. So that's what I would do. Whiteboard, colored markers, creative exercise.
Yeah, I love fishbone. Yeah, fishbones are great. Prioritize your efforts and decisions based on what's going to drive the biggest revenue dollars in. Prioritize your cost savings based on what are the expenses that are the biggest bleed to your organization. So really, really prioritize your decisions, your efforts. Keith, over to you.
They need to evaluate all their technology platforms. They need to start with a discovery of what they actually have, how they're working, and what those processes are, rather than focus on the tech. But they do need to, tech needs to play a role, but they need to start with the foundation first. Tim.
I want to double down on what Lindsay offered, because that deals with the two things I was thinking about. One is making sure that operations and sales, A, know each other, and B, they're talking. So getting through that fishbone really helps them understand the challenges that each are facing and create those relationships. Tracy, over to you.
I'm going to triple down on that, but also reiterate something Baird mentioned earlier about how do we problem solve. This is a business problem, right? Let's create an opportunity for we to solve the problem. If there's other opportunities for we that could add more meaningful assets to your organization, look at that. But take the opportunity. I mean, this is what we do here, right? Like we demonstrate what it looks like for we to problem solve with that diverse perspective scenario. And you have that in your organization as well. And if a fractional resource can be supportive in that, like this is what we are also here for, totally open conversations on that front. But it's an opportunity to take all those things and make it a we. So I'd encourage everyone to do that. And with that, we are right at the top of the hour. Great work, everybody. Lots of great gooey, good stuff in here today. Thank you so much to Scott and Islam for sharing in the comments. Really insightful pieces as well. We are here at the Fractional Forum every Monday at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. We would love for you to join us again. Next week will be our last show before the holidays. So come and check it out if you can. And until next time, everybody, I don't know. We need to sign up for the show. Something about it. But if you guys want to brainstorm with me, we will figure it out for next time.